Julia, what more can you tell us about what is happening with Title 42 right now and as we look ahead to this coming week?
Well, it's indefinitely on hold. We know that it was supposed to lift tomorrow. That would mean for over 170,000 migrants waiting in terrible conditions in northern Mexico, in tent cities where they're often exploited, kidnapped, tortured, raped. We've heard these terrible stories time and time again. Those people are now still waiting there because they're denied the right to asylum to enter the United States. Now, it doesn't apply to everyone. There are often exceptions made, but we know that many are still waiting. The CDC had decided that Monday would be the day that those public health authorities would expire. They would no longer be pushing out asylum seekers back into Mexico in order to stop the spread of COVID. But instead, a Trump-appointed judge in Louisiana has put that on hold. So right now, Title 42 stands, but it has been appealed by the Justice Department. So it will now go up to the circuit level, and it could go all the way to the Supreme Court. We've definitely seen immigration policies end up in the Supreme Court before. But I will point out that this is something the Biden administration had even been reluctant to remove. There had been lawsuits on the other side suing them to lift it earlier. May 23rd was the date they agreed to, but now it looks like that's on hold.
Of course, Julia follows this as a reporter. She follows this story closer than most. We rely on so much of her reporting. You watch this story unfold as an activist, as an advocate. What does it all say to you?
Well, I think that the conversations we're having about Title 42 right now they point to much bigger problems around immigration and how immigrants continue to be scapegoated by both parties. I mean, we just saw that Sinema on the Senate side has introduced a bill, the Sinema-Langford bill, that would effectively end Title 42, that would effectively end asylum for many years to come. And so, to me, the Biden administration took too long to remove Title 42. And now you have Democrats who are panicking about the midterm elections and are being fooled into a Republican strategy of using immigrants to scapegoat many of the real problems that we're having. And I just think that it's very sad to see the continuation of making immigration about politics when we should really be focusing on the human rights abuses, when we should really be focusing on the people who very much deserve and should have the right to seek asylum.
Julia, to state the obvious, you have most COVID restrictions being lifted across this country. If Title 42 was put in place to prevent the spread of COVID, right? That is ostensibly, I would say, that is the guise of what they are doing in order to, not allow people to seek asylum in this country. Explain then to me the judge's reasoning for keeping Title 42 in place.
He's saying that the Biden administration violated the Administrative Procedures Act. That's the exact same argument we saw when the Trump administration was forced to reinstate DACA. In other words, they didn't get the stakeholders, they didn't give them enough time to weigh in on how they might be affected. And you're right, this has been the guise of public health, because the states who are saying that they didn't have enough time to weigh in on how they'd be affected were some of the first to lift any kind of COVID restrictions, mask mandates, et cetera, in the first place. But they're saying that this would overwhelm their states. Even states like Alaska are claiming this, talking about immigrants coming across the U.S.-Mexico border. But it comes down to the fact that now the Biden administration has to go back and say, look, we don't need to go through a rulemaking, allow time for comment, because this is a public health order. They're going back to that argument. But you're right. Advocates, even when the Trump administration started this in March of 2020, said this is a border enforcement action. It has nothing to do with spreading public health, especially if you think about the exceptions. How can you make the argument that Ukrainians or unaccompanied children don't carry COVID and they're allowed in, but somehow a woman crossing with her child would be a higher risk of carrying COVID? It's hard to make those arguments.
Right. I mean, it all comes back to Julisa's fundamental point that this is about politics. It's not actually about policy. And Julisa, originally you and I were supposed to talk about having the governor of Texas trying to blame the formula shortage on the fact that there is formula going to feed migrant infants in detention. I mean, it is all sort of part of the same idea, which is if you have something that you do not like that is happening in this country, let me point the finger at one very vulnerable group of people and blame them for all of your misfortunes.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that all of these, Republicans who are bringing up immigrants as the reason for these problems, they actually are highlighting some real problems, right? When we talk about the baby formula going into detention centers, what does that say? It says that there are babies, that there are infants who require formula, who are currently in these detention centers, who are currently prisoners of the federal government. So that, to me, is the real problem. When we talk about, again, Title 42, what it really says is that, we are trying to become a nation that no longer is a place where asylum seekers, where refugees are welcomed. We are no longer a place that is providing hope for people around the world. And there is a very real difference in how we treat immigrants and how we treat refugees, depending on what country they're coming from and depending on their skin color.